So, don't know if anybody's going to join me today or not. However, I promised I would get started again, so that's what I'm doing. And I need to share my screen. No, not that. I need to share my screen. I'm going to switch back and forth between sharing the text and sharing the Ramad Valley. So we had some questions. You remember last time quite a while ago, because there was the week that we baked matzah, and then there was the Thursday that was Erev Vadika, so we didn't do anything that week, and we didn't do anything Chol Moed. And here we are. It is 4 weeks later, and we're getting back to Sefer Daniel. And we had gotten him into the lion's den, and we'd gotten him out of the lion's den, but we had a number of questions. One of the questions we had was this great big rock that they brought. Okay, that's the pasuk I'm on right now. It's chapter 6, verse 18. They brought this one rock, and they placed it over the mouth of the lion's den. And then the king sealed it with his ring, and all of his other officers also sealed it with their rings, in order that nobody should be able to that nobody should be able to change the circumstances. The chieftains, the other officers were concerned, right? The king, if we remember correctly, the king didn't really want to put Daniel into the lion's den. And so they insisted, right, that it gets sealed off so that the king couldn't get in there and save him quickly. And he insisted that they seal it also. Right, so that was so they were going to seal it, and he insisted that he was going to seal it because by this time he's figured out that this whole thing was a ploy to get rid of Daniel, and he didn't want to be getting rid of Daniel, but he didn't trust his other officers at this point, and so he also sealed it. So, had it just been sealed with their rings, so the king wouldn't have been able to tamper with it, but they could have tampered with it, and they could have gone in and they could have killed Daniel, even if the lions weren't going to kill him. But because he also sealed it, so that one they weren't going to be able to do. So between all of them, they made it so that nobody could tamper with it. So Chazal and a variety of midrashim go, and I think this one is Sikta Rabati, but it's also in Bamidbar Rabbah, and it's also in a couple of other collections of midrashim. There's a whole midrash. The whole thing actually starts off with Shlomo Melech has finished building the Beit HaMikdash, and they're getting ready to go and to inaugurate it, and the doors won't open for him. There's, some psukim in Tehillim, and he says, Su'u, right, lift up your heads, O gates, and they aren't doing anything. Let the Melech HaKavod come in, and they're like, who are you talking about, mister? You're talking about yourself? We're not opening for you. And he's like, not talking about myself, right? And he mentions his father, David, B'schut David. So then the gates open when they realize, Kivyachol, these inanimate objects, when they realized that the Melech HaKavod that he was talking about was the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that he was using this language. So So that's where the thing starts, and eventually it gets back to that. In the middle, it goes to a whole bunch of other issues, and somewhere along the line, and I didn't read them in sufficient detail to really understand why, when you're talking about this thing about the Beit HaMikdash, it was important to also talk about where else do you see that there's one great big rock that's over. Now here it's Al Pum Guba, on the mouth of this sort of cave-like sort of thing, that where the lions make their home. But we talk about that there was a stone Al Pia Be'er, and we have a story both about Yaakov Avinu, and we also have a story later on in the Medrash about Moshe Rabbeinu, who were able to wrestle. There was a single stone. It wasn't sealed per se, but it was a single really big stone that was too big to be tampered with by one person, theoretically, right? And so so everybody was waiting, right? Yaakov comes and he says, "My brothers, what are you doing here? It's still the middle of the day. You should be taking your animals out." And they said, "We have to wait for everybody to get together so that we can take the rock off the mouth of the well." And at that point, Rachel is approaching with Lavan's sheep. Yaakov sees her and goes and takes the stone off all by himself, doesn't need anybody else's help. And he and it comes off easily for him, and the water comes up for him, etc., because he's Rivka's daughter. He's Rivka's son. He's not Rivka's daughter. He's Rivka's son. Just as the water arose for her, so the water also arose for him. Later on in the Medrash, we have a similar story. Actually, Medrash might be Pshat. When Moshe goes to Midian, and he's there at the well, and the daughters of Yitro are not necessarily being allowed by all of the others to approach the well and to be able to water their sheep. And so Moshe single-handedly removes this huge stone off the mouth of the thing, right, by himself. And the Medrash talks about this as that there was kavod, that essentially this. Why do we call Hashem Melech HaKavod? Right, Melech HaKavod. It's not HaMelech HaMechubad, right? The honorable king, or the king who's filled with honor. It's Melech HaKavod. He's the king of honor. And so the Medrash asks, what's this business about his being the king of honor? And it says that he's the Melech Shecholei Kavod LeBriotav. He is the king who gives honor and dignity to his creatures. And elsewhere in the Medrash, I'm not sure if I'm going to find in this one. I may go back over to the one from Midrash Rabbah. So they also bring our pasuk from Daniel about this one stone that was placed over the mouth that was made in such a way that people shouldn't be able to. That people should not be able to tamper with it, and they say, "Oh, well, really, think about Bavel." Now, you and I don't live in Bavel. Some of us live here in Eretz Yisrael. It makes sense that in Eretz Yisrael that there are stones. Okay, a lot of the places mountainous. There are stones to be had. You can get a really big stone, which you could have a bunch of people, move together to be able to move something. But Bavel, and particularly certain parts of Bavel, are desert, like Mitzrayim, are desert up until you're close enough to the rivers that you're in the alluvial plain. And then you're in the alluvial plain. There's either a lot of sand or there's a lot of dirt, and there's not a lot of stones, because the area that they're talking about is not mountainous. Now, there are parts, not of Bavel proper, but there are parts of Persia, etc., which are mountainous. And even when we talk about Bavel in terms of the times of the Gemara, there were areas that were more mountainous, but most of Bavel is between one river and another river, and it's in these plains, and there aren't a whole lot of stones there. And so the Medrash says, there aren't stones in Bavel. Where'd they get this stone from? And so, an angel went and brought the stone from Eretz Yisrael, and brought the stone to plop down on the lion's den, which in itself is like a bizarre sort of idea, I guess, because you would think that you wouldn't want it, make it harder for them. But no, they brought the stone. And then there was, in one of the Midrashim, it talked about, and so this stone, like the stone carries itself, okay, from Malachim. The Beit HaMikdash, essentially, in its being built, there was this stone which essentially carried itself, like the Aron, right, that carried the ones who were carrying it. So the stone also, here it is. So here we are at the place about the pasuk from Daniel. And so it says, and so Chazal asked the question, what? They had stones in Bavel? Not such a big stone. So Rabbeinu Amru, our sages said that it came from Eretz Yisrael. It rolled all the way from Eretz Yisrael till it got to Bavel. And it came quickly, okay, in Shah Kala, and just when they needed it. And here's again this business about the Cholei Kavod. For Basar Badam, right, for flesh and blood, for people, Kadosh Baruch Hu does something like that in order to build his house, how much more so? The Halacha Kavod. But so here they didn't have very much, but that's where the stone came from. In the other medrash that I was looking at, so that was the Psikta Rabbati. The first medrash that I looked at in Bamidbar Rava, it says that there was that an angel had brought the stone, and in a little while later, when we hear Daniel and Dariush, the king, speaking to each other, and Daniel explains what happened, he speaks about an angel that came and closed the mouth of the lions. And so in that medrash, that's the angel who brought this stone from Eretz Yisrael. Let's take a look at, so this is Pasuk 18. So I'm gonna leave it so that I can get at some of, wrong. First of all, there I did. I stopped the share, and now I want to share Ramat Valley. Okay. So, made it blue, right? So now he says, come and see. Kama haya batuach hamelech hazeh b'hatzalah ha'elyana. Come and see how sure this king was that there was going to be some kind of supernal saving. Okay, Sharei tziva lahavi even achat, because he had commanded to bring a single stone and to place it on the mouth of, he calls it like a cistern, okay, a pit where the lions were, and to seal it with his seal and the seal of all of his ministers, in order that nobody, right, in order that the Malshinim, these people, the tattletales, right, the people who were trying to get at Daniel shouldn't do something against him on purpose. So we already spoke about that, because the king knew, right, he had this faith that the lions were, like everybody and everything in the world, were dependent on the speech, on the utterances of the Blessed One. And they wouldn't do anything against his, meaning with the capital H, right, against God's will. But people have Bale Bechira. People have free will. And permission is given to them to do what they want. And so, just as Chazal said about the Uvda de Yosef, in other words, when Yosef got put into the bore, okay, that Reuven chose that they should throw him into a pit. He thought it would be better that Yosef should be thrown into a pit where there might be snakes and there might be scorpions, right? Because what does the Torah tell us? The Torah tells us that the bore was Reik Ein Bo Mayim. And Chazal tell us, what does that mean? Either it was empty. So if it was empty, why did you need to tell me there was no water in it? Oh, because it was empty of water, but it wasn't empty of snakes and scorpions. And that's the standard Perush on that pasuk from Bereshit. And Reuven chose, just like Darius Hamelech is choosing here, Reuven chose it was better to throw Yosef into this pit with the snakes and the scorpions than to leave him in the hands of his brothers, because Reuven didn't trust his other brothers to not to hurt Yosef, but he felt that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could prevent the snakes and the scorpions from hurting Yosef. So that's a parallel. We've seen other parallels between Yosef and Daniel, and so here's another parallel between Yosef and Daniel. And then Ramat Valley says it's also written in the Zohar about this, and this is what the Zohar says about this pasuk, right? Ve'etit even chada v'sumat al pum guba v'chat. Okay, this is actually the pasuk from Daniel. And what is this word, right? Di lo tishne tzavu b'Daniel. So tzavu, the language of tzavu is the language of ratzon. Interesting. And which is exactly what Ramat Valley tells us. So when, by the way, if you ever hear Eretz Yisrael called Eretz Tzvi, it's from that same shorish, that Tzadi Bet Hey or Yud shorish, that it's a land of Ratzah. It's also sometimes, they say, well, wait a second, the other word for Tzvi is is like a gazelle or a deer or something like that. And so they say, oh, so Eretz Tzvi means that it's a land just like the hide of a deer shrinks. If you kill a deer and then you take the hide off of it, it shrinks. And so then you ask the question, how was that hide able to hold the whole deer inside of it? And Eretz Yisrael is sort of the same thing. When there aren't Jews living here, then Eretz Yisrael can't hold a very large population. But Eretz Yisrael can hold all of the Jews. Okay? Should be more and more of us, and Eretz Yisrael can hold all of us. Okay, it's a case of the small thing, right? The mu'at machzik rabba, I think the phrase is anyway. It's something which is small can hold something which is much larger than it, and that's also the sense of Eretz Tzvi. It's the way it's often expressed, but Eretz Tzvi really means the Eretz of Ratzon. It's the desirable land. Okay, and so here Amud Valley is telling us again that this tzavu, okay, is the language of Ratzon, because the intent of the king was that there shouldn't be any shinui in whose Ratzon, in the Ratzon of Yitbarach, in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ratzon. Okay, because they're allowed to, because they're given free will and they're allowed to do what they want. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu sometimes gives over, as it were, the short-term running of the world into the hands of people who have choice. The long-term, big outline of what's going to happen, that is all in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands. Okay, and he can take whatever we design. Okay, he can take all the threads that we create for him and weave the tapestry that he wants to weave. So I don't personally think there's a contradiction between the notion of free will and the notion of God having an initial goal and an end, which is the same as the end goal. And he just takes everything that we give him in order to produce that end goal. But the king didn't want any change in the short term. And he was afraid that the people, Ramad Valley calls them Malshinim, but he was afraid that the people who had pushed him into making the decree, and then went looking to catch Daniel breaking the decree, and reminded the king about the consequences that were laid out as part of the decree before they told him, by the way, it's Daniel that we caught doing this. And so he knew who he was dealing with, and he's like, I don't want there to be any interference with the Ratzon of Hashem. Because he says, right, if the merciful one, supernal merciful one, wanted to save the tzaddik from the hands of the lions, then there would be no trouble. But he didn't want these bad guys who have the reshut to do what they want. He didn't want them to be able to get into the pit and to kill Daniel by means of stones or something else that they might throw in on top of him or anything else. And so that's why it's a single big stone, not a whole bunch of little stones, because if you try to block the opening, right? Now, you try to block the opening to this cave-like thing with a bunch of different stones, right? Then they would have had, oh, look, that one got pushed in. It didn't set up, we're trying to build this wall. Oh, that big one got pushed in. We know that people can be hurt badly or can be killed. by stones being thrown at them. And the king was going to make darn sure that that couldn't happen. And so that's why he wanted there to be this single stone. Okay. Because he trusted that Kadosh Baruch Hu would see to it that Daniel wouldn't be hurt. He didn't trust the other people. Right? And for this reason, Chazal said that shetzrich lakom afilu mipnei zaken goy ulahadro, that it's necessary to rise when it says that you have to get up, right, before somebody, hadar pnei zaken, and you have to give honor to somebody who's elderly. So in some places, Chazal explains zaken there as meaning ze shekana chachma, a person who has acquired wisdom. But if you have even a non-Jew who has acquired wisdom, it doesn't have to be a Talmid Chacham who's the zaken, but if you even have a zaken goy, okay, so Chazal said it's necessary to rise before such a person and to give him glory, to give him honor. And so Daryavesh was, that was the whole thing. We made such a point about his being 62 years old. He'd lived through a lot. He'd seen a lot of different things. He had come to the awareness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ran the world, and that, he knew, because he'd been alive through the whole period that Daniel had been in Bavel. So he knew about all of the various different stories that had taken place, and he was willing to act on it. He wasn't going to go against that knowledge. Rather, he used that knowledge to guide his ways. And so he is a zaken goy that is worthy to be honored. And the Ramat Valley goes on and he says the main reason is that since this person of the nations, okay, at the time that he is elderly, he goes up ad atik yomin shel haklipa. He rises up in his soul, not in kedusha, he's in klipa because he's a goy, because it's only Yisrael, according to the Ramat Valley, that can rise up in kedusha. But if it's klipat noga, it's very close. It's not like the klipa, the far kind of klipa, which is mamish evil, but it's klipat noga, and he gets to the atik yomin, which is beyond my pay grade, thank you, but of the klipa, which is karov el malchut shel hakdusha, but that is very close to the malchut of kedusha, because we're, like I said, we're talking klipat noga here, and therefore, okay, nishlam sichlo, his seichel becomes more perfected according to his own level, and he understands the ways in which God runs the world to the greatest extent that he's able to understand according to the root of where his soul is from, etc. And such a person deserves our honor. Okay, now he goes on and he says, by the way, the secret, and we may get into things that are beyond my pay grade that I'll skip them, but he says, V'amnam sod ha'evan hazo, what's the secret of this particular stone, right, that I taught you a little bit about from the Medrash, that was placed over the mouth of this pit, is to hint at the Malchut, which is called Evan, as is known. Now, we can say that's very nice. It's called Evan as is known. It's known that way to people who know Kabbalah, and it's not necessarily known that way to those of us who are not masters of Kabbalah. So, and he goes on and he says, and this is that the stone should guard, right, like Magen, Higina al Hatzadik, should guard the tzaddik who has perfected everything, as was expressed earlier. Okay. And now I want to say new share and just switch myself back to the psukim. Oh. Okay. Gotcha. I hope that you've been able to see this with me because I can't quite tell what's going on. All right. So anyway, we then knew that then the king went to his palace and we know that his sleep was bothering him. He was upset. Okay, hold on one second. I've got somebody calling me. Wait a second. I have to. Hi. I'm in the middle of teaching a Torah class. Can I talk to you later, please?
Okay, let's just take out a second.
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. So we got through the stuff. The king gets up early and he comes close to the lion's den, and we heard this, and he was able to, and he was very pleased that he was able to speak with Danielle, right? And he had said to Danielle, I don't remember if I did translate Pasuk 21 for you a month ago or not. So we're gonna go on from here. Okay, that as he comes close to the lions, to the den, the guban, this gold, and he calls out to Daniel in a loud voice, in not just loud, but atziv, right? He was also like, he trusted, but he was also sort of sad or worried, right? Atzuv, similar kind of word, right? So he calls out to Daniel, Za'ah, and it's not clear, And the king raised up his voice and he said to Daniel, the servant of the living God, basically the God that you serve here constantly, who is able to save you from the lions. Was he able to save you? Did he save you? And then Daniel speaks with the king. Okay. And he gives the standard opening address to a king in those days. Oh, king, you should live forever, right? It sounds like something from Latin, the 101 Arabian Nights or something like that. 1001 Arabian Nights, the princess who tells Scheherazade, who tells all the different stories and stuff. Oh, king, you should live forever. So that's the type of speech that was used towards kings, and we've seen it before. We'll continue to see it. And he said, Elaki, my God, Shilach Malache, sent his angel. Remember, there was that angel who brought the stone, according to the Midrash, Usgar Pum, which closed up the mouth. The mouth of what? The mouth of the cave? Or no, it's Scar Pum Aryavata, and this angel closed the mouth of the lions, V'la Chabluni, and they did not injure me. Kol kavel did kadmohi zahu hishtakachatli. Okay. And everything prior to this, merited to be found for me. And even before you, O king, there no injury was made. So that the lions didn't injure Daniel, and they also didn't injure, weren't going to injure the king or anybody who was really faithful to the king. So Bedayin Malka Sagi Te'evalohi. So then the king was in a very good mood. Sagi is much greatness, right? Well, Daniel, and so to Daniel, he said, Lahan Saka, or about Daniel in this case. It looks like it says to Daniel, but it really means about Daniel. He said, Lahan Saka, to lift him up, Min Guba, to bring him up out of the Dan. Behusak Daniel, and Daniel was brought up, Min Guba, from the Dan. V'kol Chaval, La Hishtachach Be. And there was not any injury whatsoever that was found on him. Di Hemin Belokay, because he believed in his God. And I think we may have actually done that pasuk because I went back and listened to what we did from a month ago to be able to figure out how to pick up. And I think that we had done that. So then Amarmal, the king said, "V'haitiv guvraya ilech di achalu kartsohi di Daniel." So now the king says, so bring these men that, right, literally that ate their winks, that, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's a, we talked, I think we talked a little bit about it. It's a phrase that gets mentioned, right, we're Parshat, we just did Achrimot. Kedoshim. So it's in Parashat Kedoshim about Lotele Rachel, and in the Parshanut and in the translation, the Targum of that is the same language of Achlu Kartzoi, and Chazal have different ways of explaining that. People who go around and get invited to other people's houses because they gossip. Right? They bring all the good juicy gossip, and they sort of earn, like the nursery rhyme about earning your, sing a song of sixpence. You have to do something to earn your food. So they earned their food. They went around eating based on this kartzel, this essentially lashon hara. And in fact, we said Ramat Vali has no problems. He just calls them Alshinim, okay, people who are tattlemongers. So that's what these men who were, not only did they try to set Daniel up, but they went and they dafka tried to catch him, and then they went and they dafka came and told the king. Like, if there's a rule, what the person is doing now, I'm not Khalila saying that you should sit on your hands and not do anything if what you see is somebody who is trying to damage somebody else, and there are laws against doing that. And yes, then you should call in the police, the state, the whatever, in order to put a stop to it. But basically, Chazal feel that if, I don't know, also like with raising my kids, I might have had rules about how I wanted things done in my house, cleaning up after yourself, making your bed in the morning, this, that, and the other. And you know what? Sometimes I checked on it, and sometimes I didn't check on it. And if my kid hadn't made his bed that morning and I didn't check on it, okay, so I didn't check on it. Do you think that I would be at all happy if one of his siblings came and said, Ima, do you know so-and-so didn't make his bed this morning? I would not be happy. That's a rule that's between me and the kid. And the other child, it shouldn't be saying anything, right? That's being a malshin. That's tattletale. Now, if I have a rule that says you can't hit your sibling, and one of my kids sees another one hitting the third, then and comes and says to me, Ima, so-and-so is hitting so-and-so. Oh, so that I want to hear, because I need to get there and I need to separate them. I may or may not choose some kind of punishment. Whatever my consequence is going to be, that's up to me. But I certainly, but that I do want to hear about. But this business of you can't ask anybody other than the king for something, like we already said, it was a kind of crazy rule. But going and telling on somebody, like going and dafka trying to catch them, if the king wanted to enforce the rule, the king put guards or investigators or whatever in charge of going around and trying to catch people breaking the rule. And if the king didn't do that, then how does it become your business to do it? Right? And so that's this business of di'achlu kartzohi. So the king was really not happy with these people, for their tattle mongering, etc. And so about Daniel. And so he had those people brought. And what does he do with them? Well, go varivata rumo, and he has them thrown down into the pit with the lions. Okay. Inun, Bnehon, Unishehon, and not just them, but also their children and their wives. Lo meto la'arit guba adi shlitu bahon ayavata. And they didn't even reach the karka, the arit, the ground of the bottom of the pit before the lions were upon them. V'kol garmehon hadiko, and they crunched their bones. This reminds me, right? It's of another story that we heard earlier in Sefer Daniel, when Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah are put into the fiery furnace. And when they come out of the fiery furnace, then the people who had, sort of reported on them, they get shoved into the fiery furnace. So here too, the people who tattled on Daniel are now get put into the lion's den, and those lions who hadn't touched a hair of Daniel crunched the bones of these people, which made the miracle all that much more obvious. The Hebrew word is bolet. It made it like really stand out so much more. Badayin Darivish Malka Katav Lakol Maya Lunaya, similar language to what we get in Megillat Esther. The Darivish, the king, writes to all of the Amim, Umot, and Lashonim according to their Lashon, according to their language groupings, according to their nations, according to the various people, all the different kinds of groupings of people, cross the boundaries, etc. And so you may have people who speak Russian who live in Ashdod, and you may have, right, and etc. So it's that kind of multiplicity of language to say he wrote to everybody, right? The Dairin Bakol Ara that Shlamchon Yiske. and that lived in all of the land, okay, that dwelled in the entire empire that he had responsibility over. And he says to them, Shlamchon Yiskei, your peace should be great. Okay, Shalom Rav L'Kulam. And Min Kadamai seemed to aim di b'kol shalton malchuti le'avon zayin v'dachlin min kadam elokei di Daniel. So before me, there is this reason, or this, the reason, okay? I'm giving this command that throughout all of everywhere where my kingdom has rule, Kol Shaltan Malchuti, that they should be, so Zayin and Dachlin are two different words for like Yira and Pachad. Okay, that's probably the Yira word. If you take a look at Targum Onkelos, Zayin is a like trembling. Before Daniel's God, because he's the living God, the Kayam La'almin, and he is the eternal God. Umalchute Dilat Titchabar V'Shaltanei Ad Sofa, and his kingdom, there's no injury that's possible to his kingdom, and his rule is ad sof, till the end, beginning till the end. And what do we know about this living God? Misheziv umatzil v'aved atin v'timhin b'shmaya ba'ara. He saves. And two different words for save, Misheziv, Umatzil. So it's like Yeshua v'Hatzalah, right? Hosheti v'Hitzalti, from the language of the Haggadah. And he made signs and wonders, Aved Atin v'Timin, in the heavens and on the earth. Particularly in that he saved Daniel from the lions. The Daniel Dana Hatzlach b'malchut Darivesh. And this Daniel that we've been talking about was very successful during the whole rule of Darivesh. And not only that, but he continued on. There was a sort of a power sharing thing between the Medes and the Persians. Darivesh, this particular Darivesh was Darivesh, who was a Mede, Medah. And then also during the rule of Koresh, Parsa, who was a Persian. And that gets us to the end of the chapter. And we have one story in Aramaic to go. And I'm really just about out of time, but I thought I would switch the share. So we finished up chapter 6 and we'll start chapter 7 next week. Switch the share back to Ramat Valley and see if there's anything more there that I want to share with you. Okay. So remember we said that on the one hand, the king had faith, right? I guess the faith that he had was that if anything could save Daniel, it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he was going to make darn sure that people couldn't get in to make things. So Ramat Valley tells us, so Daniel, when he heard, but then remember the king spoke, and it was the Kala Atziv Zaik, that he cried out, but the sound of his voice was Ramat Valley is not reading it as a tzuv of sad, but etziv, nervous, daga, worried, anxious. Okay. And at the same time, the king recognized that if Daniel was saved, it was only due to Elokim Chayim, who that he, Daniel, had always served, and not in the name of any other kind of God. Okay, out of any of the gods of the nations, right? He didn't say, oh, this Elil or that must have saved you, like, did you get, but he recognized that if Daniel was saved, it was from Mamash from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then Amar B'libo shebevadai hayu b'melech hazeh nitzotzot shel kedusha. So then Daniel said to himself in his heart, wow, certainly there are sparks of holiness in this king, in Darivesh. Shemadrichim. Here we go. There's no bet in that word. Shemadrichim oto el chasidu. That these nitzotzot of kedusha, these sparks of holiness, are leading him to piety. Okay, not chasidut like nowadays. The name of the Baal Shem Tov, but Chassidut, like the early days of piety and to essential faith. And for this reason, okay, when he, in his response, okay, he to fast with the berimo, he grasped to understand, to speak with him, with the king, shown in a way that he had not spoken to other kings. Okay, while we have heard, okay, it may be that I heard this business of Malcha La'almin Chayi. And I said, like we've heard this before. We may not have heard this before in Daniel. Okay. Where I've heard it before was in the from Megillah Esther, when the Targum sort of invented, as it were, complete conversations that the Megillah just sort of gave us the bottom line to. And so we see this language, and we've also heard about this Machal Almin Chayi, O king, who should live forever, kind of thing. We saw that language from other ministers, chieftains, etc., governors, speaking to, whether it was to Belshazzar, right? Belshazzar's mother said it to him, etc. Other people said it to him. Daniel has never said it before, is what Ramat Valley is saying. And he's telling us that here, this is the first time that Daniel is willing to speak that way. Why? Because he sees that there are these mitzotzot of Kedusha. And so he's willing to say to this king, to this Darivesh, he's willing to say, Malka la'almin chayi. Something that he did not say to Nebuchadnezzar, and he, Daniel, did not say to Belshazzar. We heard other people using that language. We've never heard Daniel using that language before. And because they were really wicked kings. Nebuchadnezzar came closer to recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's role in the world and etc. But that didn't make him a good guy. Okay, and so Daniel was not willing to give that kind of a blessing to a wicked person. On the other hand, when it came to Darvish, he was willing to say it. Okay, and so so different than how Daniel spoke with other kings, he was willing to say to this king, La'almin Chayi. Shayalo Lamar says, right, what could it have said instead of that? What could the verse have said? It could have said, Adain Daniel Lamalcha Ati, that Daniel responded to the king. He didn't have to tell us, right? Then Daniel spoke with the king and he opened with the standard praise. But for him, it wasn't so standard. And so pay attention that for him, it wasn't so standard. Okay. And all right, if I want to do any more of this, I have to do it now because I really want to start with chapter 7 next week. So let me just do one more verse. And so then Ramat Valley says, why did Daniel say, my God sent his angel and closed the mouth of the lions and they didn't injure me? Like, what was the necessity of mentioning the messengers, as it were, the means by which, like what difference does it make that it was an angel, right? Because Akash Baruch Hu could have done it according to his simple will without any intermediary at all. Okay, so you should know that the reason for this, according to Ramat Valley, is because of Daniel's own personal humility. Because look, the king's already figured out that it's God that saved Daniel. Okay, and not only that, but it was God who had saved the 3 tzaddikim, right, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, from the fiery furnace. Okay, and when those 3 tzaddikim were saved, they were saved by Gabriel. Okay, because remember, Nebuchadnezzar saw the 4th figure wandering around in there and he recognized it as an angel. So Daniel doesn't want to make it seem as though he's worthy of a greater miracle than his colleagues were. We just got finished hearing, right, on Makat Bechorot. It wasn't by means of an angel, Anivalo Saraf, Anivalo, etc. It was Akash Baruch Hu himself, Batzmo Kvodo, and which is the language here that Ramat Valley is using. And Daniel doesn't want to claim that. So he says, it was an angel who came and did it. Was it really an angel? Was it not really an angel? It doesn't really matter. But he didn't need to have mentioned it. But he chose to mention the means by which the miracle was done in order to say that he was sort of at that same level. So Ramat Valley, of course, has more wondrous things to say. I just want to really just close off chapter for us. Okay, the king who had been really angry with the people who'd been, the tattlemongers, as it were, already, right? So he had stuff to say about that. I wanted to get to that last verse that said that that Daniel was successful. Hear what Ramat Valley has to tell us about closing off this chapter. So just on the very last verse, it's known that וכל עצב יהיה מותר, ולכן הצדיק הזה שניצול מקרב צרה, so tzaddik who had been saved out of the trouble. So who hitzliach during both the reign of Darius and also the reign of Koresh, who ruled after him, and his Gdula, the greatness of his reign didn't cease all the days of his life until perhaps in the reign of Achashverosh, because there we're told by all of the midrashim that Hatach, who had been the go-between between Esther and Mordechai, Hatach was Daniel. And then all of a sudden we stop hearing about Hatach, and all of the midrashim tell us that in the end Haman killed him. But at any rate, he was certain at that point he was in a much lower kind of position. But so all the days anyway, at least of Darius and of Koresh, his greatness did not cease. And even when the next king came who had not seen miracle, etc., because this greatness that Daniel had was not just from the king, the flesh and blood king, but it was from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it was Min HaShamayim. And we say that the heart of a king is in the hand of Hashem. And so that's why it says that Daniel Dana Hatzlach B'malchut Darius B'malchut Koresh, to tell us that the kings, particularly about Koresh, that he continued to give Gdula to Daniel because it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will that Daniel should have that Gdula. Okay? And and he managed to be successful during both of them. So we are going to start with chapter 7 next week. I hope some people get around to listening to this. But have a lovely week. Thank you. Bye. Stop the share and stop.